Hello everyone, my name is Funny Krishna. Welcome to Git and GitHub Masterclass. This is a day 12. In this video, let's focus on what is a remote repositories and what are the different types of repositories like a public repository and a private repository and how to create a repository in GitHub. That's what we are going to discuss in this video. First, what is a GitHub? Because I used a term called GitHub, right? What is a GitHub? GitHub is a web-based hosting service for Git repositories. Whatever the Git repositories we have created, that we can store in the remote. I can say cloud. This GitHub provides a platform for storing the Git repositories remotely. Why to store in the remote? To offer a collaborative environment for developers to work together. Because in the organizations, let us say in the development team, there might be multiple developers who needs to work on the same project. If you are maintaining the repository in your local computer, they can't view what changes you have done, and you cannot collaborate with each other, right? So GitHub is, I can say, essentially a cloud service for Git. What features they are offering, like remote hosting, collaboration, web interface is the advantage, and CI/CD integration is also available in the GitHub that we can discuss later. So Git is a distributed version control system for managing and tracking changes in the code, whereas the GitHub is a web-based service which hosts Git repositories remotely, which provides collaboration tools for teams to work together on a project. That is what the GitHub is. So it was founded, I think, in 2008, right? So then it was evolved with different things. But if you ask me, is there any alternatives for GitHub? Like, is there any remote Git providers in the market? Yes, GitLab is there, Bitbucket, SourceForge, and if you go for what we call that AWS is having something called Code Commit. These all are remote repositories. Like you can maintain your Git repositories in the remote. So I think already we have covered how to create the GitHub account. This is how a GitHub account looks like. Before using the GitHub, let us talk about a few things. It's a kind of a revision also, but let us talk about that. So if you go for a Git, whenever you create a file, let me remove this so that we can get some clarity. Let us say I'm working on a file called file1.txt. Initially, that will be in the working directory the moment once I initialize the Git repository, right? Then whenever I use a command called git add space the file name, then that file will be staged. What is the staging area? Whatever the changes you want to commit, those changes will be first saved in the staging area. Then whenever you do a git commit, that file will be committed into the local repository, which is a commit area. This is available, or this resides in your local computer where you hosted the Git and all. This is your local computer, which means other developers or other team members cannot collaborate with your code. For that reason, we have to use a remote repository which is hosted in the remote location where we can move the file. We can move the file to the remote repository using the git push command, so that the other team members can clone the remote repository into their local machine, and they can view all the code, they can do modifications, and then they can push that code again to the remote repository by following all these stages. So everything will be stored in a centralized place, or I can say remote place, so that we can view each other work, whatever, whoever did what changes and all the things. Okay. In this video, we will talk about what are two types of repositories available, and how to create a remote repository, and how we can connect our local repository with the remote repository, so that all the changes, all the codes we can stored in the remote repository. That is the agenda of this particular session. Okay, so let me log into the GitHub. It seems already I logged in. You can see an option called a new, right? So I want to create a new project. Click on a new. Then it will ask you for a name. This repository name is going to be unique in your GitHub account. See, this is your GitHub username, right? And then let us say, I will say my first project. This is going to be the name of the repository. And description, like I can say to store my first project code or something, some meaningful description. Then you can see something called visibility. Visibility. So we have two types of repositories available. One is a public and the second one is a private. If I say public, means this repository is visible to everyone and anybody can see what code I have stored, what objects I have stored, but they cannot modify unless I give some permission, which we will see in the later videos. What if I say private? Nobody can see my repository. Nobody can see what content I have stored. Who uses these private repositories? Every organization will use the private repository so that their code will be secured. Who will use the public repository? If you are working on a open source project, right, where the other people should see your code and where they want to uh, what we call that contribute some features or something, then we will use a public visibility. That is the difference. README file, already we have discussed what is a README, but here I am not creating any README file. Later we will create the README file manually and then we will see how it looks like. README is a kind of some kind of informational file which contains the information about this particular repository or the project, like detailed steps to install, how to install it, how to configure, how to use this particular application, all the information. Git ignore, already we have seen in the last video. Whatever the files you don't want to commit, especially the secrets, environment variables, or some confidential data or unnecessary data, everything we will add into the git ignore so that they won't get commit into the commit area repositories, which we will check practically and we will observe visually also. Because in the last video, we don't have any graphical user interface to check how the git ignore worked, right? That also we will cover here. So now I will say create repository. And the repository is getting created. Yes, done. The repository got created. And if you see, this repository can be accessed in two different ways. One is using HTTPS and one is using SSH. So first I will go with HTTPS so that what happens here is whenever you want to do some changes, it will ask you for username and password to commit and all the things. Whereas SSH, we will use SSH keys. We have a separate session about GitHub authentication. There we will see how to configure the SSH authentication, because in the real world we don't use HTTPS authentication, we use SSH authentication, and that I will show you from the scratch, like how to configure SSH authentication and all the things. Okay, now we created a remote repository which is a public, right? Now we need to connect our local repository with the public repository. How to do that? Let me open a folder. So where I have a git repos. See, this is the one which we have used in the previous videos, right? These many files I have. Also, we created a git ignore also. Let me open the git ignore just to show you what it is. Let me open in the notepad itself. That's okay for me. Star.log, env, and node modules folders. These will never ever committed to the commit area repositories. Okay, right. So now let us see how to connect this with the remote repository. No need to worry. Everything is available here. See, right now I want to create a README file by using this is the command thing. This is the command, but we know, right, how to create a files. Just you can create a file, or you can open a command prompt and you can execute this command so that a readme.md file will be created, which contains my first project. Let me do that. So right click, let me open Git bash here. So right now I'm in the C Git my in the project repository only. Let me paste that. So let me minimize it. See, a readme.file got created. MD means markdown format. If I open it, let me open in Notepad. That's okay for me. My first project, just a simple message, simple statement. Okay, but you can have instructions, steps, and everything. Now we need to connect this with our remote repository. Let me minimize this. I don't need this anymore. So first, already we initialized, right? Already the project is initialized in the last few videos. So no need to initialize again. README file, not yet committed. Okay, let me show you. So if I say git status, there are few files which are not yet staged. How to stage? Git add dot. So all the files will be staged, right? Let me say git status. Files are in the staged area, but they are not yet committed. So how to commit? By using a command called git commit -m commit message. So committing the files to push to a remote repository. Done. So the files were committed in my local repository. So my local repository doesn't know which is the remote repository. So already I am in the main branch. So this command is not required. Already we are in the main branch. Now here, let us connect the local repository with the remote repository. This is the command. Git remote add origin. So we are saying the local repository that this is going to be your remote repository. So the local repository got connected with a remote repository, and this is the remote repository. Let us do that. Paste, enter. So now it got connected with remote repository. How to know that? Whether it got connected with the remote repository or not? How to know? Any command? Because going forward, we have to know, right? We should know like to which remote repository we got connected. Any guess? If you know, just let me know in the comment section so that I can help you out if you don't know. Okay. So now I will show you how to know what is a Git remote repository and everything before closing the video. First, let us go with the flow. Now, what we have to do, we have to push the code to the remote repository, right? So how to do that? You can see that in the comments, in the command itself. Git push. Push is the command to push. Okay, let me show you. So here, yeah, see, git push -u origin main means we are pushing the code to the main branch of the origin. Origin, I will show you how to view and all the things. Let it be done. So already I entered my credential. So it might not ask me to enter the username and password, but if you're doing for the very first time on that machine, it will definitely ask you to enter a username and password. You will get a pop-up and you have to enter the username of your GitHub and the password of the GitHub account. Right, done. Now let us see to which remote repository we got pushed. Let me clear the screen. So to do that, git remote -v. See, you can see two things, fetch and push. Whenever you push the code, that will be pushed to this remote repository. Whenever you fetch is nothing but like a kind of a pulling the code. Then the code will be fetched from this remote repository. Okay, right. So now let us go with GitHub and we will observe whether the code has been pushed or not. If I say git status, nothing, right? Everything is clean. Now let me refresh my repository page, GitHub repository page. You should see the files, right? Okay, now I have something. If I open the git ignore, what all files we ignored to commit? star.log. I mean, any file ends with star.log. Can you see any star.log file here? No? I mean, the file which ends with .log. No? Right. Then .env. You can't see any file which ends with .env here. No? Then what else? A folder called node underscore modules. Node underscore module. See, there is no such folder in the commit area which is node underscore modules. But in our repository, you can see node underscore modules, which was not pushed. There are some log files, not this one. Those were not pushed. Only txt files got pushed, right? This is how you can create the GitHub remote repository, and you can connect your local repository with a GitHub repository. That's all for this video. We will go with another video with another exciting topic. Thank you, everyone.